this, and maybe could you just give a brief overview of like the Linux Foundation's Decentralized Trust? You know, what's the purpose of it? What is Hedera's relationship to it? You know, it seems like there's so many like important brands and organizations involved. So maybe you can just kind of paint that picture for us.
Yeah, you bet. So, you know, of course, open source goes back a long time. And initially, it was all just about making the source open and picking a good license.
Right.
These days, that's trivial. Everybody can do it. You just pick an Apache 2 license or an MIT license. Everybody loves you and they'll use your project. And we've done that. So we use the Apache 2 license for all of our code. It's all open source. Life is good. But that's really not enough. That's just like the starting point. That just allows people to see into the code and see what's going on. But, you know, if we were bad people, what we could do is we could take all of our open source code and make it closed source and do additional development on it. Yes, whatever version of the open source code that you have available, you could use, you could build on, you could do what you wanted with. But, you know, I mean, we own the Hashgraph organization on GitHub. We could just make it private and nobody would have access to the code anymore.
Right.
That would be kind of lame. The nice thing about these open source foundations like Linux Foundation is that they own that code. They own that repo. And their whole reason for existence is to provide a vendor neutral home for code development. So if we were to look at the Linux Foundation, yeah, its purpose is to be a vendor neutral home. They don't tell us how to build our code. They don't tell us, you know, well, they really, I don't know. Yeah, they don't tell us how to build our code. They don't give us the technical direction. They don't give us business direction. They don't give us any of that. But what they do is they provide a vendor neutral home. And if we, for example, became evil and started to exert vendor specific control over that organization, over that, you know, over Hyro, then Linux Foundation is a trusted person that everybody can look to and say, hey, Linux Foundation, look at these guys at Hyro. They're all behaving really badly. Linux Foundation can come in and say, okay, you guys are all off.
Right.
But it's not something that they've ever done or ever would do in the real world. You know, it's one of those things where when you create the proper incentives, everybody behaves correctly. And that's why we go into an open foundation like this. It gives trust. People have trust. And if you looked at the big companies like Oracle, you mentioned, I was at Sun Microsystems and I was at Oracle for a long time. At Oracle, they have an open source program office. If you are somewhere, you know, one of those 50,000 engineers somewhere inside Oracle, and you say, oh, this is a great project, I would like to contribute to it. Or this is a great project, I would like to use it to help build my product. You've got to go get approval for that from some central program office.
Right.
Now, if you go to that central program office and you say, hey, I would like to use this open source project, they say, well, who's running it? Now, I don't know, it's just some random company out here called, you know, they're Hashgraph. Then, I mean, they have a whole process that they have to go through in order to do that. And most engineers try to avoid that level of work, right? It's like, I'll forget it. I'll just
more paperwork,
or I'll just do something else. By being part of a trusted organization like the Linux Foundation, these other big, you know, entities, they already have accepted Linux Foundation. They're already members of the Linux Foundation. In order to contribute code and everything, the bar is way lower. And so we wanted to be in a place where there would be, number one, instant recognition by everybody that we really are open source. Because as you know, we open sourced this stuff completely a couple years ago, but there's still a lot of people who would say, oh, Hedera is not open source, it's proprietary.
Right.
And so we wanted to sort of put the nail in the coffin on that one and say, we are part of the Linux Foundation. You can't say that we're not open source now.
Yeah, yeah.
And we also wanted to make it really easy for anybody to be able to contribute to it. And we also wanted to increase the level of trust that people have that the open source project is going to be run in a proper open source way.
Gotcha.
Now, within the Linux Foundation, they have a ton of different projects. There's the CNCF, Cloud Native Compute Foundation, which is where Kubernetes lives. If anybody knows Kubernetes, all that whole ecosystem is massive, and it's in there. Of course, Linux itself, Linux kernel, is part of the Linux Foundation. Even the, I think it's OpenJS is the name of it, which is actually the foundation that manages Node.js, is also part of the Linux Foundation. So that there's a lot of actually really critical code that everybody using and relies on that's done by the Linux Foundation. Inside the Linux Foundation, they had Hyperledger. And Hyperledger was kind of like there was Hyperledger Besu, which we use for our EVM implementation. But there was also Hyperledger Fabric, which was, and Hyperledger was just like an overarching brand name for all these things, even though they really didn't have a whole lot in common with each other. Hyperledger Fabric was like an Ethereum client that you could use for private Ethereum networks. And they decided to rebrand themselves as the Decentralized Trust, Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, and broaden out the sort of projects that could be part of that. So we joined the LFDT, Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, and as one of the founding members, meaning that at the moment that they did the announcement, we were there.
Right.
And also, Hedera has joined the governing board of the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust.
Okay.
So inside the Linux Foundation, you can join it and pay dues. And if you pay those dues, a portion of that money goes to this governing board, and they get to spend it on things like marketing, events, and stuff like that. So then underneath the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, we have the Hyro project, which is everything Hedera. And then underneath that, we have a whole bunch of sub-projects like the consensus node, docs, HIP repo, one of my favorite PBJ, mirror node, all these kinds of things will be projects underneath Hyro. So
gotcha.
That's how it's organized.
That's great. So basically, what you're saying is the relationship that Hedera has to the Linux Foundation's Decentralized Trust is really about moving the source code of Hedera to something that is more like decentrally managed, that isn't so gate kept. So as you said, if Hedera turned evil, the network and the code base wouldn't be as affected. And also too, what you're saying is, because these boxes have been checked from a corporate or organizational standpoint, a lot of the magic that's going to have to happen to get this enterprise adoption is going to start with someone with a really cool idea in the CTO's office at some company that wants to tinker with something and move something to production. And right now there can be a lot of checks and balances and paperwork and red tape to make that happen, which is just really discouraging. And they're like, well, I'll just pick up something else. But now this moves Hedera in the form of Hyro into a position where that individual that's going to have the breakthrough idea at some organization can start tinkering now with this much more easily.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll give you an example from my own life. At Oracle, one of the roles that I had was as an architect on our IoT platforms that we had at Oracle, or they have. And one of them was a supply chain management tool. And supply chain management is one of the core businesses that Oracle's in. And we wanted to build it on a blockchain. And so, of course, we chose Hyperledger Fabric. Was it fast? No. Was it cheap? No. I mean, I'm not trying to throw shade on those.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that there were challenges. As a Hedera guy, it'd be awesome if I'd be able to say, yeah, we can use Hedera. But getting approval for that sort of thing is really difficult, especially at the time when not all the code had been open sourced. It was like, yeah, that was never going to happen.
Right.
But now, and being part of the LFDT sort of opens up those sorts of doors that weren't available before.
That's okay. That's really cool to hear. And definitely, it gets me excited for, again, like I think a lot of that magic is going to happen with those individuals at these organizations.